Brian Duff is a former member of the 75th Ranger Regiment and founder and host of the Mind4Survival podcast. As a lifelong preparedness advocate, Brian helps preparedness-minded people gain the confidence and skills necessary to protect their families and loved ones when it matters most. Brian's prepping experience began in high school and kicked into gear with his time as a paramedic in South Central Los Angeles. Following his time as a firefighter, paramedic, and Army Ranger, Brian spent over a decade deployed in non-permissive environments around the globe with both Blackwater and as the employee of the U.S. Department of State, where he oversaw the department's security forces in both Baghdad and Basra, Iraq. After his time overseas, Brian returned to the Washington, D.C. area, where he oversaw a $2 billion government security program. With his time in D.C. at a close, Brian went on to become the Director of Training for North American Rescue's Tactical Medicine Training Program. Now, Brian's focus is to make disaster preparedness mainstream with his Mind4Survival podcast and social media efforts. Brian is project management professional certified and holds a bachelor's degree in security management along with a master's in business administration. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to Silencio Coffee. I am with my buddy Fred today, and we've got a great guest. We've got Brian Duff, a friend of mine. I've been on Brian's podcast, and he's been on mine on We Fight Monsters, but today we're going to do it on Silencio Coffee. So, Brian, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. I was just thinking I need some Silencio coffee, man. I got, some need to talk to you afterwards about getting some over here.
Yeah, we'll get you some. And I've got to get your shirt size as well. We want to send you a shirt too. So, guys, Mind4Survival. This is Brian's, brand, and he's got a book out. We're going to go ahead and talk about it, but Mind4Survival, their approach is basically focusing on empowering individuals to take proactive steps to ensure their safety and their survival and the survival of their loved ones. So we're going to get into his career. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, and we'll see how much we can get through, but he is the founder of Mind4Survival, and he started that in 2016, and he was also a firefighter and a paramedic, so he's gone through 1,000 calls. He was also in the Army as an Army Ranger. Very cool. We'll go ahead and talk about that. And he's done a lot more. I'm going to kick it off to Fred. Fred, your thoughts on anything so far before we begin?
Yeah, so since we are a coffee company, right, Silencio Coffee, and Brian volunteered with his Silencio Coffee, I'm going to go ahead and open up with what roast are you drinking, Brian? Do you know which one you have there?
Oh, it's actually I'm drinking a French roast right now. It was all I had left in my cupboard.
Oh, okay. All right. Wah, wah, wah.
I don't know. I'm not I don't know enough about coffee. Like, it's like wine. People that know about coffee really know about coffee, man. And I'm just, I grew up on Folgers and Maxwell House. So anything above that, I'm like, wow, this is pretty fancy.
Same
I'm learning it from you guys. So.
Yeah, I became a coffee snob over time. It didn't just happen overnight. I wasn't raised a coffee snob. How do you like brewing your coffee? Do you have a favorite, like a preference?
I really like pour over. I enjoy doing pour over, but I'm lazy about making coffee in the morning. So I typically it's an old coffee pot that grinds the beans. I don't think it does a very good job. It grinds the beans. It does everything for you, but I think pour over, I really like going that route.
Pour over is excellent, but I don't have the patience for it personally. But what are you going to say, Mike?
I was just going to say, it's funny when you run out of coffee and then you go into places like 7-Eleven and McDonald's, you realize how bad it is. Because I used to drink it every day, never think about it. Yeah. Now that I drink really good coffee, I go back and say, this tastes like water. Number one, number two, it's just not good. It fills the average palate, and it's something I wouldn't even go to and pay for. Even if I wanted a coffee, I just wouldn't. So
it's kind of like when they came out with microbrews for beer, right? Before that, it was just like, I'll drink Blue Label beer, whatever it is. And then I started having, you had some like hoppy beer, and like, oh, wow, this is great.
Yeah, some good stuff out there. So, question for you. I mean, we talked about your military career before the show. Let's go ahead and bring that up. Get us started into what drove you into wanting to enlist. And also, I want to tie this into the new Netflix show as well with the Rangers in Mogadishu. And tell me about your time period, your time in, and where did you go?
Yeah, so I ended up enlisting. I was at the fire department. We were talking about before the show. I was at the fire department. I was a paid professional firefighter. Everybody thought I needed my head examined. I got smoked in basic training once they found out that I was a paid professional firefighter in Southern California. Cause this was the early 90s. I was making 80 to 100 grand a year then. And they're like, what did you come in the Army for? And it just, I don't know. I got tired of going in, sitting around. It was like this locker room every day. And it was kind of boring. I thought, it's like, I run all these medical calls. I fought fires. It's kind of boring. I want to do something else. So I hit a stoplight. I was supposed to go surfing that morning, and the surf ended up being crappy. And so I stopped at the stoplight, and I looked to my right, and there was an Army recruiter. I rolled in there and said, hey, I'm thinking about joining the Army, and the rest is history. Here I am. I went in 93. I just did one enlistment. I got out after 97, or late 96, early 97, I guess, late 96. And I went to regiment. I went through all, RIP and all that at the time, and went to regiment. And I ended up working at regiment, which was actually a really good thing. My first year in the Rangers, I was at regimental headquarters. And so I would do these deployments with all like E6s, maybe a couple E5s, senior E7s. So I being the only private with these guys, I got to learn so much information so fast and show me how to do stuff. And kind of I had a different perspective than the typical Ranger that heads over their line company. Was there for about a year. Somalia went down while I was at regiment. I wasn't in Somalia. But I ended up when it finally got time to go to, when they were getting me to send me over to 3rd Battalion, one of my NCOs asked, well, what company do you want to go to? And I said, Bravo Company. And he's like, why do you want to go to Bravo Company? Because they were kind of crazy. A lot of people thought they were crazy. They were the Mogadishu company. And I'm like, because these guys have done it. Like, they've survived. They went through incredible stuff. And I'm sure it's going to be crazy, but I'm going to learn from the dudes who have been there and done it for real. Because, at that time you had some Panama guys still stuck around. Some of the senior guys were Grenada guys. And man, I went over there, and it was epic. It was, it's one of the funnest, most enjoyable. And you're in the military, it sucks at times, but like, you're all sucking together, and it was fun. I write about in the book. One of the fun things with Ranger Regiment was they believed in making it suck. So if something sucked, they were going to find a way to make it suck more. And it was like, hey, that's what we do. And so there was like that camaraderie and misery together.
Yeah.
I thought that was real fun. I thought the level of professionalism, I don't know, maybe it screwed me up in the rest of my life. My expectations for how people are, a lot of that was shaped there, just own it. Don't screw up. If you screw up, then you own it. And it's all on you. Figure it out. Get yourself through it. So I did that, got out from there, and ended up bouncing around doing construction for a little while, and eventually got back into EMS and started contracting overseas after the GWAT kicked off.
What do you think about GWAT, man? I mean, post GWAT, now that we're out, but I mean, what were your thoughts while you're in there? And how long were you in there?
Well, I contracted the whole time in 2003. So right after everything kicked off, I tried to go back in. I went to re-enlist again.
Okay.
And it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare to get back in the military. And I'm like, I'm not asking for anything special. Get me to Fort Benning. That's all I want. I figure if I got to Benning, I'd get back in the Ranger Regiment. Just get me to Benning. And it was a nightmare to get back in. I finally just said, forget this. Stuck as a paramedic for a little bit. And then 2003, I was working as a paramedic in Atlanta. My partner said, hey, have you heard about these medics that go overseas and like work in medical clinics and do stuff over in Afghanistan and Iraq? I'm like, no, I never heard about that. And filled me in. I made a call, ended up going over. My first contract was with KBR. I did that about 6 months in Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. I ran some medical clinics there. And then I was going home on leave in early 2004 and walking through the airport in Germany, and a guy that was on my fire team, we were on fire team buddies together in Ranger Regiment, Matt McCall. I saw him walking through the airport in Germany, and he's like, hey man, I said, what are you doing here? It's like, you seen these guys, you run into each other in an airport in Europe, right? It's kind of weird. And he said he's getting ready to head over to Iraq to work for Blackwater. And he's like, hey, they're looking for former special operations guys who were medics. He goes, you want to, what are your thoughts? And so I signed up with them and ended up, did about 2.5 years in southern Iraq with Blackwater. I got tired of being scared after a while. I was like, I need a break from this. And so I ended up going home for a little bit, And I was waiting on the clearance with the agency when a guy called me up from Africa and said, "Hey, do you want to go work in South Sudan with a bunch of military advisors?" And so I'm like, "Oh, Africa, sure. Like that sounds like fun. I've never seen Africa." So I went to Africa for a year, came back, worked in Iraq for another year with DynCorp on a PSD team. And then after that, I got hired by State Department to be part of their MSD, Mobile Security Deployments. It's their Special Operations Division. So I went and worked for them. But, you know, to kind of, and then a bunch of other stuff with State. But to bring it back around to your question about the GWAT is at the time I was all in, right? Because I grew up listening to my parents, and, you know, we had family friends and stuff that were in Vietnam, and I was adopted. And so I knew my bio dad. He had been in Vietnam with the Navy and doing a bunch of stuff. And so everybody had always say, we learned our mistakes. Everybody said we learned our mistakes from Vietnam. We will never make that. We'll never send people overseas for nonsense again. And I was like, Roger that. Like, I wanted to support my country, you know, super patriotic. I love America. I love the United States. And so I'm like, yeah, all in, let's do this. You know, these guys attacked us. Let's go, you know, let's go get some, you know, get some payback and change the world for the positive. Then it transitions, you know, you start seeing friends killed and all this stuff, and that's part of the game. But then you transition to finding out, like, oh, those chemical weapons that they were manufacturing, yeah, not so much. They lied to get us into there. And I think when I went, after I left MSD, the Special Operations thing on State, I went to work for State Department overseeing parts of the WIPS contract, the Worldwide Protective Services contract. And I think that really, I started seeing behind the curtain. I was a GS-14 level there, and I started getting to see behind the curtain. I just, more and more, I became jaded and kind of realized, like, wow, this is all BS. And so while I'm very pro-America and we have to do what we want, I feel like, you know, we got a bunch of railroaded stuff that happened with the GWAT. I mean, I met some of my best friends, you know, like, I'm sure, like, we would have never met had it not been for the GWAT, and my peer group I would have never met. But then, you know, after a while you keep hearing so-and-so killed themselves, so-and-so killed themselves, and this stuff. And so I kind of have a hard, I guess, edge on it about the GWAT now. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. And I think we're going to be pulling this apart for decades to come. I think the same thing happened with Vietnam. I mean, Saigon fell in 1975. I remember coming here with Pops, and we settled in, and then, you know, you have the diaspora. Well, we're talking about all the refugees that are settling in. The Middle East is, you know, still in turmoil, but also I think you're going to chew on it for decades to come. They're making movies in Hollywood, but everything is not really honoring the whole storyline that we saw with Vietnam. A lot of Vietnam was silly action movies, right? And then it was huge critiques against the war, anti-war sentiment, how evil, you know, these baby killers were in Vietnam. I think with GWAT, it was so complex. I don't think people are going to be able to pull it apart for a while. But a lot of it's action movies, and then you're going to see real, like these documentaries like Netflix coming out right now. You know,
I think when it comes to that stuff, it's, if they're honest with you, I'll Roger up for my country on, like, a lot of stuff. If they're honest with you, okay, this is what it is, let's go do it. Yeah. And I can go do it for 20 years, like, whatever you want. But, like, it's like, don't lie to me to get me to go and get people to go in and have the lingering effects it does on people. So.
Yeah, but I think as far as peer groups, you're right. I mean, just the huge peer groups that we have because of GWAT, it's fantastic, and the opportunities that are available today, they're out there if you look for them. You can make a lot of connections with people. So fantastic, and it clearly shaped who you are as a person. I mean, you had thoughts and ideas before you enlisted in the Rangers, but now you have these formulated thoughts, right? And that probably helped you out with Mind4Survival. Clearly. You know, all your experience.
It did. You know, one of the things when I started Mind4Survival was I remember just going back years as a firefighter, or when I was a lifeguard, I would see things, people would get themselves in these positions, these predicaments, and that they, you know, cause injury or harm, or just they would cause them struggle. And I'm like, you know, there's something here. You can avoid this stuff, or, you know, you can avoid it a lot more than people were. And over the years, I kind of gradually pieced this sort of system together of how to look at the world, how to look at your safety. And that's what ended up coming out in the book. But it's something I was like, why? I shouldn't have to be putting out a book to try to get people to understand this stuff. Like, it should be. I was on a podcast the other day and someone asked me about it. And I'm like, one of the best classes I took in high school was home economics. Right? You get in there and they're teaching, and mom had showed me how to cook and do different things, but they go through, teach you how to cook, teach you how to clean, teach you how to do laundry. And so I'm like, you're going to use that for the rest of your life. Why aren't we teaching people how to be safe? Why aren't we teaching people how to do risk analysis in their own lives and figure out ways ahead? And so that's kind of one of the things when I was a young paramedic working for the fire department. Is I remember sitting in a car with this chick, and we had the blanket over us because they're cutting her out of the car. She got in a car wreck, and what had happened to her was totally preventable had she understood how to look at the situation that she was getting herself into. And that's where I was like, man, we're just not doing people favors. We need this is what needs to be out there. And that's kind of where Mind4Survival came out of. I don't get into the bushcraft and you need this many beans, bullets, and bandages. I get more into like what it is, the mindset of it, and how to look at things and how to think about it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I'll kick it over to Fred. Fred, any thoughts on anything?
Yeah, that's funny that you said the bushcraft thing, because I was going to that was in the back of my mind. But before we get into the survival stuff, I do have one question that kind of segues into survival. So at the Ranger Regiment, did they send you to SEER school, or?
No, I didn't get SEER school. No.
All right. I was just curious because I know a lot of people that kind of lights the spark, for the survival stuff. And I know you said specifically not really bushcraft and all that, but
yeah,
I didn't know. Okay.
This goes into like my head stuff. So I had a huge fight with PTSD after I came home eventually, and went to crazy camp for 6 weeks and hung out and worked on myself. And it was years where I was, kind of touch and go with whether I was going to eat a gun or not. And what they had said was like, I was adopted. And so on day one, when you're adopted, you're supposed to be there nursing on your mom and bonding. And you're like stuck in a little bassinet in a place, an orphanage or whatever it is, where with all the other little kids that are getting adopted or whatever. And they said that that gives you a sense of insecurity. Like, we know instinctually that that's not what's supposed to happen. And so I think then I had kind of a crazy, my adopted mom, she loved me to death. She passed away years ago, but she grew up in a really rough household. And so like she was a walking time bomb that you just never know when she was going to clack off. And so all that kind of led, I think, down the road to the whole safety and security. It's like, how do you keep yourself safe? How do you keep yourself secure? And that just, one of the things I did is, I think it's why I went through so many different, firefighter, paramedic, lifeguard, constantly moving on, always in the search for how can I keep myself more safe and secure? Because not looking back on it, I didn't realize it, but I never felt safe and secure. I always felt like waiting for the next shoe to drop. Right. And one of the things my therapist said when I was up at Deer Hollow, it's a great place up in Utah that specializes in trauma recovery. It was 65% of public safety, emergency room nurses, and military, like those kind of professions, have significant childhood trauma. And the reason they go into those fields is because they're trying to figure out, I kept saying, I'm doing this to help other people. Nah, but who are you really helping? If you know how to keep other people safe, you know how to keep yourself safe. So it kind of was sort of my genesis. Like, I was the kid that before seat belts weren't required, I was wearing seatbelts. Like, these things make sense. I was never the kid when we would ride in the back of, you see those pictures on Facebook, like a bunch of kids piled in the back of a pickup truck or the back of a station wagon and talking about how great it was. I hated that every time. I'm like, this is dangerous. I never really liked that whole thing.
That's an interesting idea about the upbringing, being adopted, and how it gives you an intuition for security and safety. I never really thought of it that way. That's very cool. Tell me a little bit about, so you worked for Blackwater as a contractor overseas. Were you running like an aid station? What were you doing?
No. I was a medic on a PSD team, on a security
PSD
team.
medic. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, cool. Every PSD had to have a medic on it at the time. Well, I think they still do. So
I gotcha. Did, what kind of training did you have to do for that, as far as like shooting and tactics and stuff like that?
They did. most of it was a vetting course, right? You showed up there, they expected you to shoot. So you had to go through your quals, M4, shotgun, 240, 249, M203. And then if you were specialized, like DDMs had a DDM qual, snipers had that qual. So most of it was a vetting course. And then what they kind of showed you how to do was, this is how you protect a person, right? This is how you walk a diamond. This is how you're supposed to walk and all that, to get you set up. And then once you got done through the vetting course, and they threw you down range to go do everything and figure it out. It was, when I first got there, I mean, it was, early days in Iraq. I got to Iraq at the end of, it was 04, 05. And it was still, 05 is when I got there. I went to Afghanistan, 04 with KBR. It was Wild West, man. It was wild. Nothing like I thought it would be.
Right.
It was crazy. Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. So the survival, so that's a really big, I have to make my hands closer because you can't see me out here. That's a really wide scope, right? So I guess your sector, if you will, of that industry is, you talk about safety, security. So like vulnerability assessments and assessing security postures and, that kind of stuff, more so than like you said, like the bushcraft, right? Survival.
Yeah, I'm not into I just moved to the woods, so I'm really excited to go try some of the stuff out. I see it in all the YouTube videos.
Yep.
But I've always been the mindset guy. I tell, I was just talking with someone earlier today about it, and I'm like, you go on Amazon, you look up survival. There's all kinds of books on, how do you build a field expedient shelter? How do you do all these skill-based things? And, how many bullets should you have? That kind of, there's 1,000 different books with 1,000 different opinions on it. And so I'm not that. I'm kind of the aggregate that binds it. I teach people how to look at it, how to look at their own situation, how to manage risk, do like a professional, a risk survey on yourself where you measure, your vulnerability, you measure the threat, you measure the loss, and you come up with a metrics based, this is what my true risk profile. I do some contract work on the side. I've helped do some security. I just 2 months ago did a security assessment on a port down in Texas, do some of that stuff, but trying to get it out there for just regular people. Because one of the biggest things I get from people that, they'll email me and they're like, they don't know where to start. They're overwhelmed by all the information. Everybody says they're this and that and is an expert. And they're like, I just don't know what do I do? Where do I even begin? And so my thing is as long as you're trying to think better about your situation, trying to think about what ifs and how to manage that, and know one of my big, one of the things that I really push too is situational awareness. It's something I really dove into when I was overseas, the science of it. I read textbooks on it, and teaching people how to analyze their situation, to how to know when they're getting a sympathetic nervous system response that might be hijacking their thought processes, how to work out of that, because I think if you can't think your way out of something, if you get into something and you go completely in the black just because you're overwhelmed with your sympathetic nervous system, well, now you're not being as productive as you can for you. So I really try to get into that, having people analyze themselves, their own situation. Because at the end of the day, we all need about a gallon of water, give or take a day, for us to survive. We all need X number of calories. That's very, that's very cut and dry. It's how do you get to that? How do you think your way through the problems? If you can think your way through a problem before it becomes a problem, now you don't have a problem. I also tell people on it, it's like so many people in the preparedness community, because people prepare out of fear, out of a concern, a worry about the future. And so I try to let people know that, don't ruin your life preparing for some future that may never happen, right? Like, you don't want to ruin today because of a tomorrow that may never come with what you're thinking about it. So
cool. So let me give you a scenario, or I guess pick your brain.
Sure.
For our listeners, we have a lot of the young, a lot of veterans, a lot of military age guys that are into like the cool guy stuff, we'll say, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you're telling me, or what I'm gathering from what you're telling me, is not all about how many MREs and and ammo that I can store. That's not what survivability is about, right?
Yeah.
What would you give me your 5-minute pitch on priorities, like you were talking about situational awareness? What would you tell those guys that are stocking up, worried about stocking up on bullets and MREs, their survival or their prepping mindset, whatever verbiage you want to use?
Yeah, I think obviously if you're stocking up to survive, you do need some sort of, you need food, right? But and you need your water. That's way, I have a thing I call the survival pyramid. That's way down the food chain, and that's easy to do. One trip to Walmart, one trip to Sam's Club, whatever that is, and you can have enough food to get by. And I tell people, like, yeah, I have enough food to probably last a couple years, but that's just, I've been doing it for a while. But really, 99.9% of disasters out there, if you have enough food and things to get by for a week, you're probably fine. I mean, even Hurricane Katrina, right? We're seeing a little bit different with Hurricane Helene, where people have shelter problems and different stuff now. But I try to get people understand the foundation of preparedness, understand what you're doing, understand why you're doing it, look at the success points, understand that the more you get into it, the more it's going to, doing preparedness in itself for a lot of people can cause a sympathetic nervous system response. So people start freaking out and they go into debt. Let me go max out my credit cards because I need to buy all this crap. Because right now, because something's going to happen, and then nothing happens, right? Like most people that get all their preps together don't ever use them because they never have to go through it. Nothing really happens with them. So then from there, I get into understanding your cognitive biases. Like, what are your limitations? Do a SWOT analysis on yourself. What are your strengths, your weaknesses? Are you a 55-year-old woman that, you have some mobility issues? Or are you a 20-something-year-old kid that doesn't have those? Look at your strengths and weaknesses, and then do a risk assessment on where do you live? What's your biggest threats? I imagine the biggest threat is not some natural disaster. Especially at 20-something, it's maybe losing a job, maybe getting in a car accident and getting a leg broken, having something happen. And it's like, okay, well, now how do you take care of yourself? What's your fallback to? All right, I'm out of work. I got sick. Something happened. I can't work for a few weeks. How are you going to pay the rent? You can look at the Dave Ramsey stuff, right? Have an emergency fund. A lot of people don't think about the emergency fund when they think about prepping because they think about MREs, guns, ammo, having a bunker, a place to run to, and then taking it one day at a time, right? Like if you go to the grocery store, and even in risk management, when you just react emotionally and you base everything off emotion without having any metrics to it, it's called spurious risk management. Well, when you go to the store, maybe you buy an extra day's worth of food once every couple of weeks when you're at the store. You do that for 3 months, and now you got a week or two's worth of food, right? Really diving in and understanding what your true risks are, and don't focus on those big, grandiose, the super volcano, the civil uprising, this, that, and the other. Is just going through and realistically looking at yourself. If you find yourself going down that rabbit hole of getting worked up or feeling like you want to go max out credit cards, or that what you have is not enough, pulling yourself back and asking yourself why. It's not worth, I imagine most of us here have dealt with a lot of cortisol at times in our lives. It's not worth giving yourself anxiety and kicking off cortisol releases over something that may never happen.
Yeah. That's interesting. So food's an important one, obviously. What about, do you ever dive into water?
Yeah, so water, if you look at the survival pyramid, there's a survival rule of threes. I start off at the base with having a good mindset. Then from there, it moves up to situational awareness. From there, you move up. It's kind of like Maslow's pyramid hierarchy of needs, right? You move up from there to your security needs. Once you get past that, you're looking at, you can only survive, say, 3 minutes without air, right? And that's the prepper community likes to throw that, 3 minutes without air. What does that really mean? It means you need to be able to keep oxygen going to someone's brain, or they're going to suffer irreversible brain damage and die. And the 2 ways that oxygen doesn't go to your brain is if you got a hole in you and you're leaking all your blood out on the ground, it's carrying your oxygen out on the ground, so it's not getting to your brain. or you have some sort of medical condition, something happens that stops your heart or stops you from getting oxygen to your brain, head. You know, maybe you're in an oxygen deprived environment because you're in a fire or some smoke or something like that. So then it's like, hey, how do I keep oxygen going to people's heads? Well, get a stop the bleed course, so you know how to stop massive bleeding should it happen, right? Uncontrolled bleeding, and learn CPR, right? CPR and first aid kind of stuff, because if someone has a heart attack, who's most likely around you that's going to have a heart attack? It's a family member. It's a kid. What part of what they teach you in CPR class is how to save a choking victim. Who's going to choke? Probably your kids, if you ever have kids, or maybe your wife or spouse. So those are immediate things you can do that 3 minutes without air you can take care of. From there, you move up to shelter, right? You can only survive a few hours out in a brutal environment, whether it's cold or heat, depending on how hot it is. But like in the cold, you get cold, wet, man, you can die from hypothermia in a couple hours. So how can you keep yourself warm? How can you keep yourself sheltered, protected from the environment? Is next up that pyramid. Then you move into water. So, right, you can only go about 3 days without water. Now, I was a heat casualty in the military. I can go like half a day and I'm starting to go belly up if I don't have water. So I always carry extra water. And so understanding that everybody has the adult male, and adult being 15 and up, requires about a gallon, 124 ounces of water a day. Now, if you're doing some physical activities or stuff like that, it might go up, but that's 124 ounces of drinking water. Women are about 94 ounces, and then it goes down based on it. But if you plan to have a gallon of drinking water a day set aside, that should get you good. Now, that doesn't include flushing toilets. That doesn't include washing anything. So that's just drinking water. The other thing that ties in at the same time with water is sleep. Right. And so I imagine you guys have been sleep deprived at times. You go a couple days without sleep and you're just not acting yourself. Right. I think once you go like 24 hours without sleep, you have like you're considered functionally drunk if it was equivalent to like a DUI test or something like that. So you're not necessarily making your best thoughts. And then I know when I've gone, 7 or 3+ days without sleep, I'm seeing stuff that's not there. I'm just not making. And in a survival situation, you want to be able to make your best. You want to have your most effective mindset. So working sleep into that if it's a survival situation. And so once you go up from that, the next thing that you need is food. They like to say you can go 3 weeks without food, but I mean, if you can go a couple of days, but now you're without food for a couple of days, your energy's going less, you're less productive. You start having, I start having personality issues. I get the hangries like crazy. And so having some plan to get food and all that going, to have calories coming in, get some energy going. And then when you move up from that, then it's community. I like to say 3 months without community, because a lot of people, it's not as bad as it used to be. But when I first got into the whole prepping world, it was the survivalist movement back in the late 80s and early 90s. A lot of people's plans were to head to the woods, bring their guns and their MREs, and they're going to be Rambo and figure it out, right? Throw together some lean-to and hunt and fish and do all this stuff. Well, you can watch the series alone and see that people who are like pretty much experts, that they say they're experts in that, within 3 months, you have one person still going, but usually most of them tapped out and had problems before then. What does that mean? You need community. You have to have people, and community is self-defined. We define what our community. It doesn't mean I live in this town, this is my community. Are there values aligned people? Are these my buddies? Are there people that I get along with that I can rely on, and I think they'll have my back? So it moves into the community at the top of the pyramid.
Cool. One more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend, I know you talked about Walmart for, get acquisition of your food and your rations or whatever. You've seen these companies like Mountain House and ReadyWise, and I think there's a few other that sell these like large packages of survival rations and stuff. Would you recommend that? Because those things are not cheap. I've looked around. Or do you have is there like a better way to do it? Like you said at Walmart or?
Well, you're right. Those are expensive. The thing that I like about some of those packages, there's a company, and I don't have any attachment with this company or anything like that. It's called Legacy Foods. They try to get non-GMO foods. I try to be a very kind of, you guys are with coffee. I try to be with food. I don't like processed food. It's just, I find like
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, if like my ex-girlfriend used to tell me, she could always tell when I ate junk food because my PTSD got worse. I turned into a bigger jackwagon. Right. So she's like, "Oh, you ate junk food on the way home again." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay." So I'm very into not having that stuff. So
garbage in, garbage out, they say.
yeah, exactly. Right. And so what I look at it as everything sort of as a PACE plan, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency plans that they used to have for COMO. I look at that as everything. So your primary plan, keep your cupboard stocked with food that is easy to prepare or that you need little preparation, stuff that you eat on a daily basis. And I try to let people, I try to tell people that when it comes to preparedness, your goal is to maintain as much of a sense of normalcy as possible, especially for your family, your kids, and all that. So keep your cupboard stocked. And there's some people that they just, they don't have a pot to piss in really, and it's hard for them to do that. Well, do your best. Keep your cupboard stocked so that way if there's something happens, you're just eating the same food you always do. Then your alternate might be those freeze-dried meals. Like I like to have those. I have a bunch of them that over the years that I bought and stuff, and I have stocked away. But that's just because they're long-term. I don't need to worry about keeping them fresh. I keep them in the, somewhat climate controlled. And they're kind of normal meals as far as Mountain House meals, those kind of meals go. But it gives me a fallback plan. So that's usually my alternate plan. My contingency would be something like MREs or something like that. That's even less. People would get into it even less. And then emergency is you're having to figure it out, right? That's the Rambo guy in the woods trying to figure it out. So try to keep things as normal as possible. Try to have enough food that you can live on for a week or two stocked up. If you run out of that, then that's when you're looking at freeze-dried meals and all of that stuff. Because like you said, it is expensive. I don't think they're as healthy. They're typically loaded with sodium and all the nonsense. So
yeah, I was thinking when you were kind of leading in, you kind of touched on like, if you run out of that stuff or you can't get it, it makes me think of those zombie apocalypse movies.
Mm-hmm.
People in urban areas, like you can't really hunt unless you want to eat cats and dogs, right? If it comes down to it. But like if you live in a rural area, then you have options of wild capturing game or fish or, that kind of stuff. Well, they have fish in cities too, but
yeah, well, you run into the problem, like even where I live pretty rural now. I have a stream that I know they stock, so there's probably some fish in there, but how much fish are you going to catch in a day to feed you and your family? That's a lot of fish you need. And then every other meathead is going to be out in the woods hunting once the food starts running. So how long do you have before the deer have all moved off? Because every time they turn around, someone's taking a shot at them. So it's having that redundancy and building up in steps too. A lot of people, they want to go to this, I need to have a year. And so they're just obsessed with getting that. Well, if you build up slowly and take it over time, you can get there. Mm-hmm. I looked at it one day and I want to say it's like, and it's not the greatest stuff in the world, but like a can of Spam and like a thing, like a family pack of Idahoan potatoes is about 2,000 calories. That's kind of what you need for a day, right? So just start off figuring, what do I need to get me by for a day? And every time you level it up, all right, now I got 2 days, 3 days, a week or whatever, and try to just kind of gradually scale it from there and realize that you're probably never going to need it. Now, when I lost my job, when my PTSD got really bad, so going back to like preparing for a disaster, that was a micro disaster. It's a personal disaster. I ate some of that long-term storage food. I was eating that. I didn't have any money. I couldn't feed my animals at one point. I was almost homeless. I was eating that food. Yeah. And that's what I use. So it's not necessary that you're using this to like, because the earthquake hit, this tsunami hit, whatever that disaster is. It's when hard times come, that's a disaster for you. That's hard. That's a crisis for you, your family, whatever. So maybe you dip into it then, you have an unforeseen expense. The transmission goes out of the truck. Now you're broke and you don't have enough money to go to the grocery store. Heck, when I was a firefighter, I was so irresponsible with my money. I got paid good every 2 weeks, and probably Wednesday the second week, I'm eating salad dressing sandwiches because I'm broke again, right? So it's like, do you having that there gives you so much flexibility. The other way, and it helps create opportunity, is maybe there's a job you want to get, and you're like, but I need this training. I don't have the money for it. Well, having that food storage goes, you know what? I can dip into my food storage so that way I can pay to go to this school. Or if I don't like the way work is going, I have 3 months worth of food saved up. Screw my boss. They're having me do some stuff that I don't agree with. It morally bothers me. You have that ability to bounce on your job, and you're not going to starve. So it's preparedness. A lot of people look at it just for the disaster. It gives you opportunity. In the tactical world, right? Time and space, time and distance. It gives yourself time and distance from running out of opportunities to be able to control your future more.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of good information, some great tips there. It's funny when here where I live in North Carolina, I get a little crash course in the apocalypse or survival or whatever you want to call it every once in a while when we get really bad weather. I don't know if you guys remember hearing on the news when those power substations got shot up in North Carolina.
Yeah.
That was my county. So I didn't have power for like a couple of weeks, and everything in my house runs on electric, everything, heat, all of it. So, I have a small generator, which I was able to run my refrigerator and some lights, some minimal lights and things like that. But water, getting water. Cause we have a well. When your electric well pump doesn't work or your water pump doesn't work, then what? So you're buying big jugs of water wherever you can. And it's like, man, I gotta do better at this. And then power comes back and it's like back to business as usual. I'll worry about it next time.
It's not easy, right? It's hard. And what I tell people, one of the ways you can see how prepared you are or where some of your holes are is just what you said. You don't have to wait for some crazies to go shoot up a substation. Just go throw the main circuit breaker on your house, shut your house off and go, all right, we're going to do this for the weekend and just start seeing, where you're at. It's like here, the same thing. I'm on power. I have a well. Well, if the power goes out, I'm not flushing my toilets. Like, what are you going to do? Like, all of a sudden now I don't have water in my toilets. I'm not getting water out. So I have a spring house and I have a creek. I don't know. It's like 4 degrees out right now and there's snow blowing. So, okay, that's going to be, I'm going to have to carry up my water, like literally. And, when I talk about this stuff, like, people are like, oh, you must be all squared away. I'm like, no, I'm a slip shit half the time when it comes to this stuff, man. Like yesterday I was like, oh, we're getting ready to get hit with a bunch of weather over the next week. I ran up to the store and bought a bunch of jugs of water, just like, hey, I'm covered. At least I'm covered in case the power goes out, right? But I was kind of scrambling to do that. So it's a never-ending battle, man. It's always something if you want to try to stay on top of things. And but it's a good way that you looked at it, like, hey, I need to work on some of this.
That's I call that my refresher training, because the power goes out here at least once a year for a substantial amount of time. So I call it a humility crash course. But
think about the people down in North Carolina where Hurricane Helene hit.
Yeah. Oh, it was.
Right? Yeah. They're living in tents. So, and when I tell people, I'm like, unless you're Elon Musk that has a bunch of former tier 1 guys and a bunker that's dug into the hill underground in Wyoming somewhere, right, with endless resources. As soon as disaster hits, you're on the disaster clock. So those people in North Carolina, even if there were some of them were like just squared away preppers, I don't imagine. I imagine they're stuck. We're like, where are we getting our food? They're having to figure out a lot of things. They're living in tents. Like at some point, you run out of shit.
Well, their ability to move and go anywhere was hindered. Their roads were washed out. They had no roadways, no bridges. So it was bad. They were literally stuck in place. Yeah. To deal with whatever they had going on. So it was pretty bad.
Yeah, I was in Saluda when it hit. I was up there for a prepper expo that I was speaking at. And it was raining. I was literally outside. So like the hurricane came, I was outside, I was staying at this Airbnb, and I'm just like, the power had gone out, but I'm like, yeah, whatever. So I was like, I don't want to sit in this darkened basement. So I was outside doing yoga in the rain going, oh, this is great. And then like this 5 to 10 minutes wild microburst came through, and like a bomb went off. Trees started falling. A tree hit the house that I was in, like cut the house pretty much in half. You said you couldn't go anywhere, and those really test you, because I went out, all the cell phone lines were down. There was no cell phone, because when the floods came through Asheville and wiped out all the main cell phone infrastructure, you weren't communicating with anybody. The only way I knew that what was going on was a tree came down on the hood of my truck, but I could still get my truck going, and I had satellite radio, like FM, Sirius radio, so I could get a little bit of what's going on. But it was wild. For the 3 day, they got the roads cleared after about 3 days of trees. But while I was there, like even the mainstream media wasn't talking about, oh yeah, this big hurricane. I'm like, this place is wiped out. Like no one knew. And so it's like the people there were like, well, what do we do for food? Like they had leftovers, that in the fridge kind of thing that they had kept from some catering service they were dealing with, but they're like out of food. I'm like, wow, like they can't even flush their toilets. They're in the morning. I'm sitting out there and I have my little, backpacking stove going, and I'm making some coffee, and they're walking out to the woods with a e-tool to go take a dump in the woods in the morning. Like all that stuff's on the table. And, those people are still suffering with that stuff. The people in Maui are still living in a disaster zone.
Yeah. All those things you don't really think about, you take for granted till it's time. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Mike, what do you?
Yeah, you think about global upheaval. I mean, you talk about the Dust Bowl, right, in the 1930s. You talk about Steinbeck, right? And you got these families that are going from place to place in California, all over in the Midwest, looking to work and looking to eat. But we saw a lot of that here with COVID. And I'm not going to get into where you're pro or anti-vax, but really you saw how people could be during a global upheaval. And that, you're shut down in your house, right? You can't leave. And getting something as basic as toilet paper. When I went to Walmart and I asked the woman, where'd you get that toilet paper? And she clutched it to her chest, and her husband stood in front of her and he said, you need to back off. And I looked at my 25-year-old son. I said, did you see this guy? He's just losing. I said, sir, you've lost your mind, man. And I wanted my son to see a grown man acting insensibly with fear. And I said, Jacob, do not be like him. And we walked away. He said, that guy was crazy. I said, Jacob, this guy looked capable, but most of these people, they don't reason well. So what do you do with that? I mean, how do you build your teams? What do? You guys, they used to do the old ham radios, and you would call, is anybody out there? But what do? You get on the internet? How do you build your communities?
So with me, most of it's like a peer group of friends. Mm-hmm. And I don't have like a local, like, hey, this is the place, right? Most of it, I have a dispersed group of friends that, I know from experience and working with them, and some I didn't work overseas, but I just spent a lot of time with them, that they're solid people. I tell people, a lot of people when they call them all these different names when it comes to prepper groups. Some call them mutual assistance groups, MAGs, and all this. The prepper community just loves having all these different terms they throw around, and they just get into it. But I tell people that it's not like I grew up playing, I was a Dungeons and Dragons player back growing up. I always played like role-playing games, and I'm like, it's not like you're putting together some sort of fantasy Dungeons and Dragons party where we need 2 fighters, we need a healer, and we need this. I'm like, because if a couple of those people are jackwagons, now you got just crazy dynamics. We've all seen it. We've all done, worked in the military and law enforcement, different stuff, where if you get a bad apple on a team, it ruins the whole team. Right? Like it brings everybody down. So I tell everybody, it's like, look, you need to find someone who, first off, especially when it comes to disaster, has values that are aligned with yours. Because just like, and then that there's somebody you feel you can get along with, and that they get along with you. Because if you don't have those two things, the rest of it doesn't matter. Because they're going to be a pain. And maybe there's a group of people that they would jive with. But if they don't jive with you when the disaster hits and everybody's put to, just like you were talking about that toilet paper, right? What was that guy doing? He had a sympathetic nervous system response going to the point where he thought you were a threat, possibly, over toilet paper, rather than realizing you were just asking, hey, where's the toilet paper in the store? And so understanding, like knowing that, hey, I have people that I'm comfortable interacting with, that when times get hard, they're still going to make decisions that I align with, right? We've talked about, I think we talked about it, Mike, before. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm not into the gun bro culture, the bro gun culture, whatever that thing is, right? And I've seen people from very big followings that have said stuff like, well, they said, well, being interviewed, and they said, well, do you stock up on food and water, all the prepper stuff? Well, no, not really. And they're like, what are you going to do during a disaster? Well, I'm just going to go take it from somebody. And to me, that's that values alignment again, right? Like, I don't want that person around me. Like that, that's like, you're morally not in my same league. When COVID happened and they were getting ready to do the lockdowns, I drove to Montana. I have friends up in Montana, a friend of mine whose brother I worked with overseas who was killed. I drove up to her place and dropped off a bunch of my freeze-dried food. Because I'm like, I want to make sure you're taken care of. I make sure my family's taken care of. That's the thing with the prepper world. Not everybody prepares, and some people just don't want to. Okay, well, then my job is I'm going to do something that I can to help you out. But a lot of people, when the disasters come, it's just they lose their mind. They, they get that emotion and what did that guy have? You had fight, flight, or freeze going on, right? He had his central nervous system was kicking. He had the fight response going. Like, he was so terrified that he was like really like ready to fight you because you're asking about toilet paper.
You also have to get your family in alignment too, your family, friends, and familiars. I mean, you really see how people behave, pre and post event. And for years I had said to my wife, hey, this is where I want to be. And she said, well, I don't want to spend money this way. After COVID, she said, hey, this is what we need to do. And we've been doing that. So she said, go to the gun show. I picked up another couple thousand rounds. Over here, if you look over here in this basement, I've got lots of prepping food. Down here, I've got these boxes. And what I do is I go down to the dollar store. Now they're canned food and they'll expire, but we will cycle through those. And every paycheck, I'll buy $50 worth, right? And you do that. And so you have hundreds and hundreds of cans and you can go through them and eat those. But she's in alignment now. So what do you recommend? Because again, you're going to see the breakdown in how your friends and family are. You see that they're going to react differently, but isn't that what's most important? The epicenter from where you are out.
I think you have to understand that even in any sort of difficult situation, everybody's going to have their moment, right? Even you might have days where it's just like it gets too much and you struggle.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so it's understanding that, giving people the grace that you would want if you were having problems. Right. And understanding that not everybody's on. There are some people who, when they think about, and I have friends that do this, when they think about being prepared for disasters, they're like, I can't even think about it. It terrifies me. It's so overwhelming that they just can't think about it. So that's where I kind of lean into it. Like, okay, I'll prepare for them. Right. In the moment, you do what you can. I think also one of the problems in the preparedness community, and the people who are really into it, a lot of people kind of say, well, they just need to accept the reality. Well, that reality hasn't necessarily happened yet. In the moment, yeah, they might. And since it hasn't accepted yet, what people try to do is they try to convince people by fear. Well, you got to be prepared, because if not, you're going to starve and die. And this is going to happen. The hordes are going to show up, and it's always this doom and gloom. Well, somebody who's already scared, if you make them more scared, they're just moving farther into the black. They're moving farther in that sympathetic nervous system response. So at that point, what should you do? Back them out of it and talk about opportunity. Well, hey, if we have an extra month of food, it'll give us the opportunity, if we want to grab a different job. Mm-hmm. If we want to go away for a weekend, we can grab some food. If the power goes out for a week, start small and get them into it.
Yeah.
Let them see the benefits of what they're doing, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, let's get to your book, man. So this is very interesting, because I know that you have a free prepping guide and checklist that you give out to people, but you also have your book. Let's get into that. And if we can just break down, some of the chapters without giving everything away, but how did you decide that you wanted to write a book? And what is that material? This is all fresh new material, or this is something gleaned from all your years?
It's from all the years, man. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's from all the years. Seeing people struggle and just not have the information. When I first started doing the podcast in 2016, like, people would hit me up, they're like, I don't know how to think about this. Like, it was just the stuff that, like, the foundation of what you have, like the crawl, walk, run, They're trying to run and they haven't gotten through the crawl phase of understanding how to look at it. And when I was working overseas, you would notice certain things like, oh, this situational when I thought about this way, and it helped. I know I guess it was probably 2009 or so when I was working in Baghdad. At the time, everything had kind of settled down. The war, it was, the war really wasn't supposed to be the war anymore. And we had gotten some reports that the bad guys were using RKG3s. I don't know if you know what those are. They're like old German potato masher grenades, but they have a shape charge in them, and they typically have a little parachute on the back. So when they throw it, the parachute pops, and it causes it to go straight. And then when it detonates, it's a shape charge. It can blast through armored vehicles and stuff. So we knew out in Abu Ghraib that they were hitting people with these RKG3 shape charge grenades. And so everybody's like, well, what do we do? Because we're in these up armored, suburban limos that you're moving down the street at 35 to 60 miles an hour. It's hard to open those doors, and like you can't open the door and just pop out and shoot somebody. It's not going to happen. And so everybody was trying to think about it. And I remember I told we're having a team meeting. I said, well, we're driving in the big car. If we see somebody, just point the truck at them and run them over, or, head at them. And that should get them, seeing a up armored Suburban running at them should work. And I remember everybody laughing. That's stupid, Doc. That's stupid. We're going through Abu Ghraib, and I look up and I see this dude walking, and he gets up off the curb and he starts walking right where we had to slow down for a turn. And he has an RKG3 on his side. And I'm like, RKG3. And the biggest guy that laughed at me was my team leader at the time. And he immediately looks, he's like, run that dude over. And we bounced out and headed towards the guy, and the guy turned away and walked away. And the next day, I believe it's that same dude hit a military convoy. They ended up killing him and two buddies right there. But that shows like the whole thought process that goes into it, right? So thinking of when I would see stuff like that, I'm like, man, that's a good lesson to learn. And so when COVID hit, I had kind of started getting into doing the book. I was trying to formulate it. But then once COVID hit, I was living in Vegas. I had run the last job before COVID. I was working as the training center director for North American Rescue's training center out in Las Vegas. And once COVID came in, like it was March, and I was like, oh, they're going to lock all this stuff down. I'm like, I don't want to be anywhere near Las Vegas if this thing goes. Because I was going to the grocery stores at night and watching the mayhem, just like you said, people getting like struggling over toilet paper and people giving each other a hairy eyeball because someone got an extra can of, Spam or something. So I ended up grabbing a utility trailer, load like a little camping trailer, 14-foot camping trailer, loaded all my end of the world supplies, my dog and my two cats into it. And I headed up to a buddy's farm in Michigan. And so I sat up there and I started writing the book, and one thing led to another. I talk about the fundamentals of preparedness. I break down, I came up with formulas for success where it's mindset plus your ability plus luck, went into all that, got into situational awareness, cognitive biases, survival pyramid, risk management, and all that stuff. And then the big part was towards the end, I never felt right about it. I'm like, I got this book and I teach people all this stuff, but what's the point? Like, what is the point? What's the point of being prepared? It's to be able to live the best life possible that you have at the time. Everybody thinks, like in the prepper world, people think about preparedness and they all default to this Mad Max level. I'm living out in the woods, like everything's hell, and like that's what it's going to be. And they kind of get into that. And I think you prepare so that no matter what's going on, no matter what struggle you have or opportunity comes your way, you can live as best a life as possible. So that ended up once the book went to the publisher, I ended up stopping it and going, no, I need to add something. Added a whole 8th chapter on self. And so it's how to live your best possible life, how to prepare and think about things in a good way, things that help you out to understand what you're preparing for and all that. So I'm really happy with it. It took about 4 years to get it out and get it published, but man, I'm really stoked. And so far it still has 5 stars on Amazon. It's doing well. And I couldn't be happier with it. Even, I've told friends, they said, well, what are you going to do now? I'm like, I'm going to keep doing it. But you know what? I've put everything I could into that book and I have it out there. So anybody from a prepper, it's good I tell people it's a self-help book for preppers, and it's a great preparedness book for people who aren't preppers, because it's no doom. I don't do doom and gloom. I don't do any of that stuff. It's just kind of, hey, this is all about creating opportunity to live a better life. So that's really what it kind of where it came out of.
That's very cool. You know, Dostoevsky said that man can get used to living a very base life, and a lot of people do that. They do the gulags. You know, they just say, "Hey, I'm going to suffer, and this is my life," and they accept it. I think perhaps your mindset is, "No, you know, I'll endure." However, that is not the end of life. That's not, you know, you're not a fatalist. The
No.
attitude is to get out of this and live a good life and bring others with you. So I think it has you know, a positive spin on that, right? I mean,
Yeah,
your whole. Go
when
ahead.
I was in Ranger Regiment, man, I remember like you go out to the woods and you're doing your stuff, you're doing your training, and you're not sleeping, you're walking all day, you're tired, you're sore. But every day when the sun came up, I got to watch the sunrise every day. And I was like, even if it's that 3 minutes or 5 minutes of watching that sunrise, because we always had to be ready to fight the Indians every day in case somebody attacked at dawn. I'm like, they can't take that away from me. Like, I own that sunset, that sunrise, and that made me feel good every day. And I was just like, all right, I just gotta wait till the next sunrise tomorrow. Like, I'll have there's a guaranteed good moment coming, right? So,
Yeah,
it's
great attitude, man. Fred, kick it off to you, man.
Stand to the French and the Indians.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I'd love to sit here and pick your brain, man. Like the more we talk, the more questions I come up with. I guess I'm kind of interested. You were the training director at North American Rescue Products.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you did there?
Yeah, that was a great job, man. I worked at Triple Canopy up in DC. The CEO and I had differences of opinions on stuff, so the CEO gets to call the shots, and I was out of the picture. And a buddy of mine that was running, it was called JTM and Associates before that. I had actually gone there to do medical training when I was working for BW. I'd do a paramedic research there, and it was fabulous. Like, you're cutting off limbs off cadavers and that were stuffed under helicopter hulks. It was just very real, and it was very fun. I mean, at some point, they ended up getting rid of it, but at some point they had a margarita machine in the classroom. So as soon as it got towards the end of the day, people started slinging margaritas. It was a very, big boys rule kind of place, but they trained hard. They made it exciting. And it was a lot of wow factor. Like, wow, you're not getting this anywhere else. And so I had brought Jim on, was coming on at Triple Canopy to do some medical stuff for us. And then once Triple Canopy went sideways with me, he's like, hey, do you want to come and run the training center out in Vegas? He had just gotten acquired by North American Rescue. So I did that, went out to Vegas, and it was fabulous, man. The place. So in 2017 is when PTSD really jumped up and jumped on my back, late 2017. And so the place that you probably don't want to go work is a place where you have screaming baby noises, guns, bullets, bombs blowing up and blood squirting everywhere when you have a bad case of PTSD. So I was out there for about 18 months. The PTSD, I'm like, I got to do something. I'm going to end up ending myself. But it was, I still remember the first the first training iteration we had come through after I took over. It was Anglico showed up, and they came in, and I brought in an explosives guy that works for does like a lot of Hollywood stuff. And so, and it's kind of prophetic now. I still have the video of it. It goes back. So this was early 2018. And I said, hey, we need to have some drones come in and attack these guys. People are like, drones? What is it? I'm like, yeah, man, like it's happening over in Iraq. Right before I left, we were dealing with drones. And so we had them bring drones in, but then we had ground explosives planted and just these massive explosions where I was like, oh my God, I hope we're not killing people out here. But the Anglico guys got done with it, and they're like, oh my God, this was like the greatest thing ever, right? And so you had all the instructors at the time were all former SOF guys who had a lot of experience. We really tried to make it as real as possible. And I did a prepper weekend out there. We brought a bunch of people and ran them through stuff. They have the Stop the Bleed course where we learn how to put tourniquets and wound pack and all that. Well, the typical Stop the Bleed from stopthebleed.org, it's like a 2-hour course or 4-hour course. I don't recall exactly. It's not very long. It's a good course. I think everybody should have it. But we would bring in moulage artists. So these people that are coming there that have never really done anything and trying to learn how to put on tourniquets, all of a sudden they have arterial blood squirting, people screaming. We have, like special effects artists putting bullet holes. Like, this stuff looked real. So it was a great place to work, and it was a lot of fun. I think that's one of the big things with training. Make training as realistic as possible without hurting people.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds pretty cool. What I didn't even know they were doing courses. Like, I've used their products. I was an 18 Delta in a past life, so I'm familiar with products. But I didn't know they had a schoolhouse. What are they doing like TCCC courses or? Yeah,
they do TCCC. We did a lot of, I don't know what they're doing now, but we did a lot of TCCC. We did a lot of courses for like Customs and Border Patrol. Their Air and Marine Division would come in. We do train their medical stuff. Anglico, a lot of SEALs would roll through. The SEAL guys would roll through out of Southern California. We supported some stuff with Ranger Regiment. The idea had been to set up something on the East Coast and West Coast. I don't know that it ever took off so much on the East Coast, but it was always great. You go out to do training, you get some really great, you being an 18 Delta, the kind of training that you do. And at night you're in Las Vegas, man. So it was always fun. We'd finish up a training iteration during the day. The next morning they're all coming back in. Guys are all, dragging their butts in, looking half beat up. Chuckling about the night before when it went on, but it was great. We would do, we did stuff like, we would coordinate with different hotels. And so like we made them do like a scavenger hunt through these different casinos, and they'd go up to a hotel room. We'd have some role players in the hotel room. Like one was like someone just attacked somebody with a knife, but as these guys are rolling through the hotel, they're going out there and grabbing a drink and stuff. So by the end of it, they're just, it was fun. It was a really good time. Yeah. But they do have the training. I don't know. One of the things they got into is they do online EMT courses, and then they do skill testing there. I think that's a lot of what they do now. I don't know how many, what kind of contracts they're getting as far as the SEALs or Department of State or anything like that goes now, but they had it rolling back then. Okay. So tell us a little bit now, like, what are you doing now? I know you do your podcasts and your articles, right, on emergencies and prepping and stuff like that. Talk a little bit about what you got going on now. Yeah, mostly right now I'm focusing on the podcast. I do an article. I have some people that write for me too. So I do usually 2 articles a week come out on the website on Mind4Survival. I'm focusing on the podcast and also doing some courses kind of based on the book, coming out with some webinars and different things, trying to ratchet up and get the word out there. My prepper demographic is I kind of not go after the female demo, but like I go after the people who aren't into the, they're not too much into the firearm stuff. Like I don't want to get into, I was a firearms instructor for the government, I was a BFOC and all of that, but it's just not something I want to go down the range. One, hearing a lot of gunshots activates my PTSD somewhat. So I kind of avoid a lot of that. And I think a lot of the preparedness community services that group of people. And I think like the group of people that are more low key and kind of want to ease into it kind of get left by the wayside. So I'm kind of trying to focus on them to get them in because, hey, everybody needs to be prepared. Just not someone that's wants to go out and blast with a Barrett. Although that's I do enjoy going out and shooting my Barrett. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm focusing on. Just trying to bring the word. People say that when they listen to the podcast, it's like, oh, I'm very mellow. I don't do doom and gloom. Like we know there's bad things happen in the world. I don't have to remind anybody. That's why they're preparing. That's why they're there in the first place. They know. It's all about mindset, like you said, right? We did a podcast last week on mindset, and we talked a little bit about some of that stuff. So it's interesting that you brought that up, and it kind of ties right in with that. So that's perfect. Yeah. Tell us how people can find you, social media platforms, any of that stuff. Do you have? Yeah, mostly you can find me on. I do a little bit on Twitter and Instagram, but mostly I'm on Facebook. I have and my website and the podcast. So it's Mind, the number 4, and Survival. .com is the website, and then I have a Facebook group and a Facebook page that I run. So I'm old, man. I'm a Gen Xer. All this tech with these different, like I get in to try to do Instagram, and I'm like, what's all these options? Like, don't give me options, man. I don't want options.
Tell me about it. You see the monstrosity of cables I have running all over under my desk and over my feet. You see me fidgeting lots because I'm like trying to get untangled from cables and stuff. So cool. Awesome. That's all I have, Mike. Turn it back over to you.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Fred. Brian, hey, I want to see if we can see this photo, and I want to get the backstory on this one.
Uh-oh.
So, hey, for those who are listening, he's in full kit somewhere. I don't know where, and he's sitting on top of a pink Lambo. So this is a very cool looking car. What is the story behind this, man?
That was at the I want to say it's something like that was in Baghdad in 2009, and that was like their kind of like their not their FBI, but where they would do like crime scene analysis and teach that kind of stuff. And so we went there. We took someone there that was going for some meeting, and there was a bunch of cars like that. But that pink Lambo was Uday Hussein's pink Lambo that he used to roll around in. So I was like, oh, I got to get a picture on this, man. Like, yeah. Cool, so they had a few cars there like that. But yeah, that was Uday Hussein. I think it was Uday Hussein's pink Lambo.
Yeah. So, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I want to thank my partner, Fred. Also, thank Brian for coming on. To get your copy of your book, they can go to Mind4Survival. I'll put the links down below, but they can also get it on Amazon.
Yeah, go to
There's
Amazon.
A lot of good feedback. Yep, a lot of good feedback here. You can see the reviews, a lot of good information again. And I know where you're coming from. I know Fred knows as well. I mean, upheavals come and go, right? Biden's out of office, Trump's in office, shouldn't change anything. Your perspective should be based off of that. Largely, but really, keeping yourself.
We never know what's happening in the world, man.
That's right.
You just never know. Like, I mean, you could be totally behind Trump. You could be a Biden person, and who knows? I mean, listen to what Sarah Adams has to say. You never know what might happen down the road. So it's always good to be prepared. The book. I love the book that came out. My book is not a beans and bullets. It's not going to teach you bushcraft or. It's not going to take what kind of best knife or axe, has nothing to do with that. It is all mindset and how to look at yourself, how to look at situational awareness, preparedness, and all that good stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. Fred, you got anything before we sign off?
No, sir. Brian, thanks for coming on, man. It was great talking to you. I learned a lot, and look forward to reading that book now that you got.
Likewise, man.
Curiosity. Thanks.
Yeah, let me know what you think about it, dude. I love hearing feedback.
All right, guys, you take care. God bless you all. We'll see you next time.